We're preaching through the themes of each book of the Bible. It will take us to the spring of 2024 to do that because there's 66 books, 52 weeks, so we'll be into the spring before we finish up doing that. But we're talking about the overarching theme. So each book kind of has a theme that if you read it, you can see it woven through that particular book of the Bible. And so we're in 2 Samuel. And in 2 Samuel, the theme really is unity because the nation of Israel becomes unified into one nation again. But you find this concept of unification and restoration woven throughout the entire book of 2 Samuel. So there's this constant theme that they're going to be unified, they're going to be restored, it's going to happen. And so today we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to talk about this concept of painful restoration. Painful restoration. So I used to watch this show called American Restoration. I don't think it's made anymore. I don't even really have regular TV anymore, so I don't know whether it's still made anymore. But it was a guy named Rick Dale, and I first saw Rick Dale on a show that I watched called Pawn Stars. Now, for all of you in here who are hard of hearing, that is spelled P-A-W-N. It is a show about a pawn shop in Las Vegas. And so he would buy things, and some of the things he would have restored, and he would sell them. And Rick Dale's piece of that show was so popular that he ended up getting a spin-off show called American Restoration. Actually, there were 4 or 5 shows that actually came out of that. I think Counting Cars or Counts Cars or whatever he calls it with Danny, where he does cars, that came off of that show. And I was always amazed at what they could do with certain things. Like they would bring something in that looked like it was useless. And of course, it costs a lot of money, right, to be able to redo it, and then they would come out with this product that was just amazing. And there are a lot of reasons why something on that show needed to be restored. Sometimes the item had been neglected. Nobody had been using it. It had kind of been lost. It had been stuck in a barn, and it had deteriorated over time, and somebody found it and decided, okay, I want to restore this. Other times it needed to be restored because it was used, but it was abused while it was used. And I don't know if you've ever seen something like that you go, how did that get in such bad shape in such a short period of time? It comes from abuse. So, something needs to be restored because of neglect. Some things need to be restored because of abuse. Some things need to be restored because they're forgotten. I suspect if you have an attic, if we went in your attic or in your shop out behind your house, we would find things that you forgot you owned, right? If you've ever moved, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You go start to box things up and you go, oh, that's where that's been for the last 25 years, You just forgot about it. Well, some things needed to be restored because they had been forgotten about. Some things needed to be restored because they weren't worth anything and now they are, right? I'll tell y'all something that caught me by surprise this past week. Barbara and I are riding down the road, and this Firebird, an old, y'all know what a Firebird car is, okay, so it's Firebird passed us. And the paint was worn on it, and this would have been a car of my teenage years, and I would guess it was probably 80s models, late 80s, probably was the late 80s because it didn't have the flares on it, it was more the straight line, so it probably was late 80s, early 90s. And it had an antique car tag on it. And I was like, how did that happen? When did I get old enough, y'all know what I'm saying? That a car from the 90s or 80s could be suddenly, I think the rule is 25 years. If it's 25 years or older, you can get antique. Somebody could correct me on that, but I think I'm right about that. It's 25, after 25 years, it can be considered an antique car, and you can get an antique car tag for it. Other things are nostalgia, okay? Like they don't have a lot of value, but they mean something to you and you want to have it done. And if you go to resell it, it's probably not going to be worth anything to anybody else. So I have one of those things in my life right now. So when I was a young man, my grandmother gave me a piano that was in her house. Now, my grandmother couldn't play the piano. I don't even know why she had a piano. None of the kids could play piano. It was just in the house. And it was old. It's an old upright. It's not fancy. It's just, just very plain. It has ivory keys, and most of them were chipped. And she gave it to me, and I've kept it. When she gave it to me, the soundboard was warped in it. It was never going to be able to be tuned properly. And so I am in the process of having that piano now turned into a desk. And it'll look like a piano, like the upright piano, but it'll fold out and turn into a desk. And I'm hoping to pass it along to my kids. That's a nostalgic thing. If I go to sell it, it's not going to mean nearly as much to anybody else as it does to me, right? You understand? And so sometimes things are restored because of nostalgia. And you would see that on that show. Somebody would come in and they would like, man, this was my grandfather's, or this means a lot to me, and I would just like to have it restored. Well, we're going to talk about people restoration today. And, sometimes things are repurposed, like the piano I was just talking about, instead of restored. But the purpose of a restoration is to make something as close to its original form as possible. And with the advent of things like 3D printing, that is amazingly possible today. Like, they can make parts that you would not have been able to get previously because, you can put it in a computer and a big 3D printer can make it. And it's amazing things that you can do today. But the thing I have found in my life is that everybody doesn't appreciate restoration. Some people would rather have something brand new and untested than to have something that is old and restored. And everybody's different, so like if you ask me what my dream car would be, like if money were no object, practicality were no object, it would be 67 Mustang Cobra. 67th year I was born, okay? But here's the thing, I can't afford one. Right? If you see me driving a Cobra, I've won the lottery. Okay, that's going to be the key. But some people don't appreciate things that are restored. They would rather have something new and unused rather than have something that was restored. The same is true with people. The problem when it comes to restoring relationships, though, is that it is much messier than when we're restoring something physical. Restoring people and restoring relationships is so complicated. But the truth is, many of them need to be restored for the very same reasons that objects need to be restored. Some of them have been forgotten. Some have been abused. Some have been lost. Some have been neglected. Some we have not paid attention to the way we should have. Sometimes we want to restore something because we suddenly see a desirability in the person that we didn't previously have. And there are some similarities, but the difference, the big difference, is the nuances and the messiness of restoring people. This process of restoring people is so complicated. And then you add that to the fact that most people, and I say that pretty accurately, I believe, most people would rather have someone that is not tested but hasn't been broken than they would to have someone that has been broken and restored. It's like, all right, so let me see if I can give you this example. The average pastorate in the United States of America at evangelical churches is slightly less than 3 years. Do you know why that is? Because at about the 3-year point, they figured out all of his problems, and he's figured out all of their problems, and nobody likes that. They would rather have a pastor that they believe is perfect and doesn't know that they're not. Right? And so it becomes this quick turnover, because we would rather have somebody that we believe is perfect. Well, okay, we haven't seen them, we haven't known them do anything wrong, so we're going to change them and put them up because we're uncomfortable with the imperfections. We're uncomfortable with the failures. We're uncomfortable with the flaws because the process of it is difficult. And so today we're going to look at this situation. So let me kind of lay some groundwork here. David is being restored as king or ruler, and then he's going to be made ruler or king over the entire nation of Israel again. What has happened, okay, so this goes back a number of years. This story starts a number of years ago. Amnon, his son, rapes his daughter Tamar, and he does nothing about it. And Absalom is furious. That's his oldest son. Absalom is furious that he doesn't do anything about it. And let me just say right here, on the start of this, is this one thing. I believe that this could have been headed off had David done the right thing years before. Right? I believe we don't have this conflict in 2 Samuel 18 and 19. Had when Amnon raped his daughter, he had just done something. He did nothing. If he had done something, he should have been put to death by the law. That's awful difficult, okay? But he should have been dealt with, and he wasn't, and it got under Absalom's skin, and so eventually Absalom kills Amnon. He invites him to a party, he kills him, and they come back and tell David, and Absalom is on the run, and David is brokenhearted because Absalom is on the run. Eventually, they are reconciled. Eventually, Absalom comes back. He comes back first and lives in the city, but he can't see David. And then David finally allows him to come and see him, and he sees him, and the relationship is better, and David blesses him, and Absalom starts going to the city gate. You remember in the sermon about Ruth, how things took place at the city gate. And Absalom sat at the city gate, and when people would come with problems, he would say, "I'll be your judge." You know, so he's the oldest son of the king. He probably has a lot of influence, and he sits there, and he gains tremendous influence in the situation. Now, I said earlier that if David dealt with Amnon the way he should have, we probably don't end up with the conflict that we do. I would say that's true of all restoration, all right? The best solution is never to put yourself in a predicament you have to be restored. Okay? Let's just be honest. That's the best solution, all right? The best Christians aren't the ones who have the biggest testimony, all right? I've heard my dad say this 1,000 times. He would say, you know what? He said, it's not the people who have gone out and blown it the most and found their way back that I admire the most. He said, it's the people who have been steady and lived a godly life the best they could their entire life. He said, those are the people that I admire the most. And I want to say that out of the gate. If you do the right thing on the front side, but the truth is all of us do things from time to time, some smaller than others, some bigger than others, and we just mess it completely up. And so David doesn't deal with Amnon. Then Absalom comes along. He goes to the city gate. David's got to know what's going on, right? David's got to know he's getting influence. He's gathering a group of people. He has to feel the rebellion coming. You know, you can hear the murmuring before it overtakes you. And David doesn't say anything. And so eventually Absalom gets enough people around him that he proclaims himself the king of Hebron, and they decide they're going to move in on David's territory. And what does David do? He packs up and leaves. You understand? Now, I have a theory, and I don't have time to talk about this. David had a weak spot. If David was weak in one place in his life where he just struggled to consistently do the right thing, it was where his family was concerned. Saul was his father-in-law. He struggled there. He struggled to do the right thing with Amnon. He struggled to do the right thing with Absalom. It just seems to be that he can kill thousands. But when it comes to opposing his family, he just can't bring himself to do it. So he abandons the palace. He and his family and a bunch of his leaders, they're just like, okay, you can have it. You be king. It is really this amazing thing when you read the story and understand that David was this great warrior. And when it came time to fight his son, he just, all right, no, we're out. You can have it. So they go off and they regroup themselves, and Absalom gets some advice that, he needs to attack David, and there's going to be this conflict. And David has one request: go easy on Absalom. If you see Absalom, don't kill him. Bring him back alive. Don't hurt him. Don't hurt him. Well, now, you have to know that most of those commanders were sick and tired of David rolling over to Absalom, and they were going to take care of it, and that's exactly what they do. When the conflict happens, they kill Absalom. And word gets back to David, which is where we are in this passage. And this is the first thing I want to talk about, is this: some things are lost in restoration. Almost always in a restoration, a physical restoration, let's just say you're getting a gas pump restored, or a barber chair, or a pedal car. Who knew that pedal cars could cost so much, right? I had a couple when I was a kid, and now I wish I could go find them. But almost always in a restoration, some pieces are damaged so badly that they can't be used again. In order for it to be a functioning whatever it is that you want, gas pump, barber chair, pedal car, often things have to be replaced. New parts either have to be brought in, and the old ones get discarded. Rarely is there a restoration where you get to keep everything that was present to begin with. Here's the thing I know about restoration: we lose some things in order to be restored. The passage I read this morning, the first part of it, it says, word soon reached Joab that the king was weeping and mourning for Absalom. As all the people heard of the king's deep grief for his son, the joy of that day's victory was turned into deep sadness. I want you to think about this picture. They had won the battle, but they were feeling defeated because David was so concerned about Absalom. And listen, if we're not careful, we will spend so much time talking about what we lost that the people who have helped us win will be discouraged. He says they crept back into town that day as though they were ashamed and had deserted in battle. And it says the king covered his face with his hands and kept on crying, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son. My son." I don't know. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to pretend to know. I cannot be very empathetic because I haven't experienced death that close to me. I don't know. And so for me to be too difficult on David would probably not be appropriate. But here's what I'm going to tell you. For him ever to be king, for Absalom to be king or David to be king, one of the two of them had to die. They could not keep on this collision course that they were on and one of them not die. There was not room enough for both of them to survive and be. They had patched things up one time, but they had reached a place where one of them was going to have to go. This was going to have to be removed if David was ever going to be king of Israel again, if he was ever going to unite the kingdom again. Absalom was going, there was no way for him to come in and be vice king or vice president or king in waiting. Those days had passed. That ship had sailed. They had reached a point that something had to be done. And if we're not careful, we will spend all of our time grieving over what we lost and not looking at what we can gain. David was more concerned about his own personal feelings and the loss of Absalom than he was about the good of the people. The people were better off with David as king. The people were better off in a unified kingdom. The people were better off as David as the leader. The one thing we know about David is his heart, his motives tended to be toward God. The problem was Absalom's were not. And I'll say this again, because this has to be put on David. Had David dealt with Amnon, he's probably not grieving over Absalom. I'll preach this sermon from as much experience as I can, but I'm going to just lay it out there for you. There are some things you will grieve in your life that you're only grieving them because you didn't deal with something earlier. Had you handled this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, you wouldn't be grieving something else today. There's a lot of examples. They could be physical, they could be financial, they could be emotional, they could be mental, they could be relational. There are a lot of places where if you don't deal with this, you're going to pay a price later, and there's going to be a grieving process because previously you didn't do the right thing. Not doing the right thing eventually comes back to haunt us. And listen, there's nobody in this room. There is no one in this room that believes in restoration more than I do. There is no one in this room that believes in standing beside somebody any more than me. But I'm going to tell you, many of the grief and prices that we pay would not have to be paid had we done the right thing when we had the opportunity. And if we're not careful, we will spend time looking back at what could have been and what should have been. And the thing I understand is this: restoration has a price. You cannot keep everything you have and get everything you want. Some things will be lost in restoration. Here's the second thing. Restoration requires priorities. Some things are just more important than others. I don't know how long ago it's been now. Whenever the book came out, there was this book called One Thing, and I've referenced it in a sermon before, but I did a small group, a leadership group here a couple of times as we went through that book. But the premise of the book is basically this: what one thing can you do right now that by doing this one thing would make everything else easier and better? What one thing can you do right now that by doing that one thing would make everything else easier and better? So in the journal that I'm using this year, it's a focus journal. It has at the top of the first page of every day what it calls the big three. And at the end of the day, you have to answer the question: did I do the big three? Because there's a list of about 20 other tasks for you to fill in. But the big three are up here. And the worst kind of day is when you've completed all the small tasks and not done the big ones, right? And sometimes you've got to stop and prioritize and say, this has to be done first. This is what's got to be done now. This is what we've got to deal with on the front side. It says this: then Joab went to the king's room and said to him, we saved your life today and the lives of your sons, your daughters, and your wives and your concubines, yet you act like this, making us feel ashamed of ourselves. You seem to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. Basically what Joab and David has got to have a strong relationship, because he is talking, y'all got to put some tone in here. He didn't go, king. No, that ain't what's going on. I believe at this point, Joab's kind of had enough. You're going to see this tension between the two of them start to play out in the next few chapters, because David replaces him. He's no longer David's right-hand man. The tension becomes that real. And Joab's like, man, you got to stop this. You're loving the people who hate you, and you're hating the people who love you. You got to get your priorities in order. If you don't get your priorities in order, nothing good is going to happen. You got to stop over here doing this. Listen, it doesn't mean that you can't grieve. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't grieve. It just means that you've got to put your priorities in order. He says, you seem to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that your commanders and troops mean nothing to you. It seems that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died, you would be pleased. Now, this statement would give you the clear tone. Okay? Now, go out there. He didn't say, now go out there. That's not how it was going. He was telling him, now go out there and congratulate your troops, for I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a single one of them will remain here tonight. Then you will be worse off than ever before. Here's the thing about restoration. If we don't get our priorities in order, we will end up worse off than we are today. Listen, I understand grief. Grief is a difficult thing to work through. As a matter of fact, we have a class regularly here that deals with grief. There's going to be one this spring. Grieving is important. But if you look back and focus on what you lost, and you don't look ahead and focus on what's to gain, you're going to find yourself in trouble. You've got a choice. You can focus on one or you can focus on the other, but you can't focus on both. There's a reason why your rearview mirror is about 80 times smaller than the windshield. It's meant for you to glance at. It's meant for a reference point. It's meant for you to know where things are. But if you try to drive with your rearview mirror, you're going to get in a wreck. If you focus on your rearview mirror, if you look in that rearview mirror and that's all you look at, let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to run into some stuff in front of you. You're going to run into some ditches and you're probably going to die pretty quick. And a lot of people go through life. I read their Facebook posts. I talk to them. I meet with them. I have meals with them. And 20 years later, they're staring, and they can't figure out why things aren't getting any better. It's because you're looking in the rearview mirror. It's meant to be a reference, not a vision. And if we're not careful, we will start building visions on what's in the rearview mirror instead of what's in the windshield. We've got to look forward to see what God has for us. The past is meant to be reflected on, not focused on. I believe that genuinely with all of my heart, that I have to look back. I have to see what has happened. There are things I can learn. I've got to reflect on it, but I can't focus on it. If I spend all my time focusing on it, I'll never be able to see what God wants to do ahead. And you will never appreciate what you have if you're always talking about what you lost. Have you ever been in a relationship with somebody or had a conversation with somebody? And it doesn't matter how, listen, I know people who are grieving 6 months out, 12 months out, 18 months out. I got that. But we're talking 18 years, and if they have a conversation, that's the only thing they're going to talk about. It's right on the tip of their tongue. That's what's happening here. He says, listen, if you don't want to die, get out there and congratulate your troops. Get off of the stool where you're sitting and do something productive. And I think we have to get our priorities right if restoration is ever going to happen. If we're ever going to find any semblance of what things used to be, it's going to require us to prioritize some things, which means some things are lost and you have to leave them behind. Some things remain and you have to prioritize them. And some things are to gain and you have to know what they are. Here's the last piece. Restoration will connect you with people that once opposed you. I would tell you this is the test of restoration. It is usually the test for both sides. What I mean by both sides is there's a group of people who weren't involved in your situation, they weren't involved in your life, and they're over here going, you are the stupidest person that I've ever met, right? And you're over here having made the mess, and you know how they feel about you. And many times for restoration to happen, you got to hold hands with folks that did not like you. I won't even say do not like you. Listen, if we only restore people we like, we're going to have a small group. If the only people that we work to restore in the kingdom of God are people that we can relate to, that we understand, that we like, that are on, the same page as us, we're going to miss a lot of opportunities to restore people. As a matter of fact, I'm not covering the whole piece of chapter 19. You should go and read it and see some of the people that David pick up. But I would say the only path forward is to join forces sometimes with people that once opposed you. Unity is only achieved when two sides find common ground. It says this, so the king went out and took his seat at the town gate. As the news spread throughout the town that he was there, everyone went to him. Meanwhile, the Israelites who had supported Absalom fled to their homes. So you got two groups of people. All the people who were for David are coming out to greet him. All the people who had been opposed to David now are scared to death and are running to the house. And it says, throughout all the tribes of Israel, there was much discussion and argument going on. The people were saying, the king rescued us from our enemies and saved us from the Philistines, but Absalom chased him out of the country. Now Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, is dead. Why not ask David to come back and be our king again? Then King David sent Zadok and Abiathar the priest to say to the elders of Judah, why are you the last ones to welcome back the king into this place? For I have heard that all Israel is ready. You are my relatives, my own tribe, my own flesh and blood. So why are you the last ones to welcome back the king? And David told them to tell Amasa, since you are my own flesh and blood, like Joab, may God strike me. So Amasa is the one who helped Absalom. He says, if he kills, may God kill me if I do not appoint you as commander of my army in his place. Then Amasa convinced all the men of Judah, and they responded unanimously. They sent the word to the king, return to us and bring back all who are with you. So the king started back to Jerusalem. And when he arrived at the Jordan River, the people of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and to escort him across the river. Shimei is an important character that you should read about. Shimei previously, when David's coming by, curses him and throws rocks at him. Okay? He's going to pick Shimei up and bring him along for the ride. It says, Shimei the son of Gera, the man of Bahurim in Benjamin, hurried across with the men of Judah to welcome King David. 1,000 other men from the tribe of Benjamin were with him, including Ziba, the chief servant from the house of Saul. So I want you to notice what we got. We've got somebody who's cursed him. We've got the commander of Absalom's army, and we've got somebody from the house of Saul who didn't like David and ran and tried to kill him as well. So we've got three parties. I feel like I'm reading Lincoln's Team of Rivals. It says 1,000 other men from the tribe of Benjamin were with him, including Ziba, the chief servant of the house of Saul, and Ziba's 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed down to the Jordan to meet the king. They crossed the shallows of the Jordan to bring the king's household across the river, helping him in every way they could. It says David sent word to him, hey, I'm one of yours, you're one of mine. Why ain't we making this happen? I would tell you that restoration and unity often doesn't happen because no one is willing to take the first step. Right? Think about it. Let's just get rid of kings and kingdoms for a minute. Let's come to your house. You and your spouse have a dispute. And if you're sitting here saying, we don't have disputes, lying is a sin. Let me just say this. Let me stop right here. All right, just because some people would tell me we never had any conflict. All right, here's what I'm going to tell you. This is my theory about it. Either you're lying, and that's most likely, or one of you is useless. Right? I mean, we have to have conflict in my house because if we both thought exactly the same way, God, our train would have come off the rails a long time ago. The reason we have conflict is because she sees things differently than me, and that's a healthy thing, right? That's a healthy thing. A healthy conflict is not a bad thing. But when you have conflict, what's the hardest thing to do? Apologize. Take that first. You don't even have to apologize, right? Sometimes there ain't no apologies going on. Sometimes it's just moving your foot over in the bed and touching theirs, right? That happened at y'all's house too? Huh? It's no, I'm sorry, but it's just that first step. It's the hardest one to take. Because we've dug in on our position and we believe we're right and you know, they did wrong and they should come to me. As believers, sometimes we have to be the ones that break the ice. We have to be the ones that step across and say, hey, how about let's make this right? And sometimes it's with people that do not like you. Listen, I've walked into rooms and I knew that 80% of them could not stand me. But I got to reach out. The burden's on me. Like, I'm not going to stand before God and get to say, well, God, they didn't like me. I can't imagine what God's going to say back to me. I would love to hear it. No, he's not going to do that. If the obligation is on me, I have to do what is right, what God expects of me. Shimei is present, Ziba's present. Suddenly, you have these people around David from Saul, from Absalom that are encircling him, and they're working together to unify the people. There are some places you will only have unity and restoration if you can hold hands with people that once opposed you. As a matter of fact, I would say you may have to hold hands with people who deliberately attempted to destroy you. Amasa probably fits that description. You have to be willing to say, all right, I'm stepping over here. I'm trusting God. I heard a speaker recently, they said, run toward the danger and away from the safety. Jesus Christ never called us to live in safety. He never said run to safety. He said search for the one, right? He said go find the one, go help the one, go minister to the lost. I'm sending you out into the world as sheep into wolves. That's what he tells them. He says I'm pushing you out. It's not going to be a safe place. Sometimes you're going to put your hand out and it's going to get bitten. Don't let that cause you never to put your hand out again. Sometimes you're going to try to help people and they're going to resist and not accept it. Don't allow that to harden your heart to where you can't help people. I will tell you, restoration is painful. It is something I believe God has called me to. I believe it's something God has called the church to. And if we're patient and we walk through it, the people are better off and we are better off when all is said and done. But if we say, nope, I'm washing my hands, I'm done, we'll miss out on some of the blessings. What happens? What does the scripture read like if David says, nope, I'm going to have my little kingdom and my little people, and I'm going to hang out with the folks who like me and those who don't, just so much they can go on their merry way. David took the first step. Restoration is difficult. It is painful. And I have to tell you, there are a lot of times that I give David a lot of grief about some of the things that he does in Scripture and the way he handles things. But I have to say here, David did the right thing. It never says he doesn't stop grieving Absalom. You got to believe that in his mind he's thinking, man, if I'd have dealt with Amnon, I might still have my oldest son. If I'd have dealt with Absalom earlier, I might not would have had to kill him in this battle. I'm sure he has some regrets, but he is determined he's going to do the right thing and what's in the best interest of the people. Restoration is beneficial for the people.